Bismillah, Assalamu alaikum. In today's video, I'll be refuting the second argument made against Hadith preservation and reliability of Islamic sources, namely the late date of Islamic sources. This is my second video in this series of refuting the arguments made by Jawad Hashmi and Joshua Little. Let's get started. So here's their contention against the Sunni Hadith. Most of the sources we have for Islamic history are from the year 800 onwards. Sirat ibn Ishaq was written around about 150 Hijri. Musannaf Abdul Razak dates from the end of the second Islamic century to the start of the third Islamic century. So there's a lot of gap involved here from the time of Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam till the recording of ahadith, and hence the ahadith are unreliable. The works we have are actually recensions from their students, right? For example, Sirat ibn Ishaq, what we have is the recension of Hisham, who got it from Ibrahim ad-Darimi, who got it from Ibn Ishaq. And for the Musannaf of Abdul Razak, we have it from his student, the recension of a student. So there's a bigger problem there many times, and acknowledging this point, later on Little goes on to say many times using the isnad ka matan analysis, which is basically related to the concept of the common link theory, though it's not exactly the same thing. But if you understand the common link theory, you'll get an idea of what I'm talking about. I already made a video on that topic. If you hadn't watched it yet, go watch that one. Using that analysis, we can date a lot of the ahadith and sources to the 2nd century, a lot of them to Ibn Ishaq, a lot of them to Imam Az-Zuhri rahmatullah alayh, or in rare cases even to Urwa ibn al-Zubair radiyallahu anhu, who is in the first Islamic century, I think the last quarter of the first Islamic century. But even then there would be a gap of half a century from the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam to Urwa ibn al-Zubair radiyallahu anhu, and hence these records are unreliable. So here's the basic contention. It fails on numerous grounds. There's a lot of dishonesty and double standards involved here. Let's get started on the refutation. First, I'll point out the general conceptual problem here. Then I'll give 3 counter arguments in this regard. So here's the basic point. Just because earlier sources haven't survived, right, that doesn't mean they didn't exist. Just because we don't have earlier sources, that does not mean the hadiths are preserved. It doesn't mean the hadiths are fabricated. It just means we don't know what the earlier sources said. However, we Muslims, Sunnis, have an isnad and a hadith transmission system, right? We actually have the sources mentioned. Just because we don't have earlier works, that doesn't mean we don't have sources for our works. Read any hadith, the isnad there is mentioned the source of the hadith. Now, here's what the Orientalists can do in this position. They can claim that the hadith and isnad system is unreliable, right? But they have to prove it's unreliable for their claim to work. Remember, there are 3 positions that can be taken in regards to ahadith. Either they are preserved, either they are not preserved, either we don't know whether they are preserved or not, right? Why should we assume they are unreliable? We can just take the third option before going on to the evidence that we don't know whether they are reliable or not. But their reliability or unreliability will be settled on basis of the reliability of the isnad and the hadith transmission system, and the reliability arguments for and against reliability of hadith. So just because some sources are missing, right, that doesn't mean the hadiths are unreliable. Now someone can try to claim that earlier sources didn't exist, right? The hundreds of more than 100 sources mentioned by Mustafa al-Azmi recorded in our earlier historical records, they don't exist. Someone can try to claim that, but they would have to prove that claim. To prove that claim, they would have to show that Islamic historical records are unreliable, and they can try to make arguments for that, but they can't assume that. So conceptually there is a major issue with this claim, because it doesn't show these are fabricated or wrong or they are bad sources. It doesn't. It just takes a possibility and turns it into probability without arguing for it. More than that, there are three major issues, three counter arguments that can be made in this regard regarding the dating of the sources and why basically there's a lot of dishonesty involved here from the Orientalist side. Firstly, I'll go to the source problem and the gap between the events and the sources, right? The source problem is actually greatly exaggerated, and to prove this point, I'll quote a Western historian who will basically make the argument that the gap problem for the sources that Western historians accept as reliable, right? Generally, is much greater uh, than the gap problem in the case of Islamic sources. So, if anything, this can't be a problem against Islamic sources going by the standards that Western historians use. Let's get into the reference. This is regarding the reliability of the sources, and this is basically comparing the gap problem in Islamic historical records with gap problem in Roman historical records. Let's get started on the reference. With these thoughts in mind, are we possibly seeing examples in the critiques of some writers not only a religious bias but also forms of cultural and chronological chauvinism? Why are Western documents such as Tacitus's histories or Caesar's Gallic War accepted largely at face value, but sources couched in religious constructs are so eagerly rejected out of hand? For example, Tacitus's history, as handed to us today, are based on a few manuscripts dated approximately 900 years after the time he allegedly wrote the work. Caesar's Gallic war suffers from the same problem, being based on a few manuscripts dated 900 years to 1000 years after the fact. Yet almost these are almost universally accepted as truly written by these individuals and are even considered largely factual. Moreover, if they are the only sources for an event, they are typically accepted as is. Why such a benefit of the doubt not accorded to early Islamic sources? In contrast to these Western classics, the materials of the early Islamic sources date anywhere from 120 to 300 years after the events described, and these in written form handed down from the previous oral transmission since that time. So I think what this reference clearly shows that the bias and double standard of the Western historians in regard to the Islamic sources. The sources that they accept have a gap problem, a major gap problem of 1000 years, right? And Islamic sources would have a gap problem of what, 120 to 300 years. The double standard and the patheticness is actually self-evident, right? Someone can try to claim that the Western sources were mainly written transmission and the Islamic sources are mainly oral. First of all, the Islamic sources are not mainly oral because for the simple fact that there are numerous collections of ahadith. There are about, again, more than 100 early collections of ahadith. I think about 50 or so from Sahaba and a lot more from the Tabi'een. If you want a list for it, go check out Mustafa Al-Azmi's work. So this contention does not work here. More than that, I just made a video showing the reliability of Islamic oral tradition. So this contention doesn't work anyway. Again, I think this clearly shows the double standard and bias of Western historians in this regard. The second point I'll make in this regard in this contention, right? Using the Snadka Matan analysis that clown was using, we can actually establish the reliability of Musannaf Abdul Razak, which is a very important source for a hadith. And this is actually shown by Harold Motsky, who is a major Orientalist scholar. I'll just quote him for the brevity of time. While studying the Musannaf of Abdul Razak, I came to the conclusion that the theory championed by Goldza Schacht and others in their footsteps many others, myself included, which in general rejects Hadith literature as a historically reliable source for the 1st century Hijri, deprives the historical study of early Islam of an important and useful type of source. It goes without saying that this material cannot be regarded as completely truthful. This even the Muslims themselves did not claim. Basically, after that, he goes on to make some claims regarding Islamic sources being unreliable or Islamic method being unreliable. Of course, watch my arguments for Sunni Hadith preservation. I think that will prove beyond a doubt the reliability of Islamic methods. But I'll just read somewhat a little bit more from here. This is the same reference. I think that with the help of the newly available sources such as the Musannaf of Abdul Razak and that of Ibn Abi Shayba and the hadiths contained in early complexes of transmission such as those of Atta in Abdul Razak's Musannaf, where the hadith is not the real object of the teaching but only marginal, we are able to raise the question of the historical value of hadith anew. So the source that Moron Little was criticizing, I mean, even using the Snat Matan analysis, we can establish it going back to the 1st century really easily. Actually, I'll make a video on the. This is actually an argument for Hadith preservation, and I'll make a video on that later. Now, a third refutation in this regard is we have an example of a very early source of a Hadith from the middle of the 1st century, 1st Islamic century, Sahifa of Hammam ibn Munabbih. Now I'll just quote two references regarding this. First one, this is from Arabic literature to the end of Umayyad period, page 272. An example is the Sahifa of Hammam ibn Munabbih, a Yemeni follower and disciple of companion Abu Hurairah radhiyallahu anhu, from whom Hammam wrote this Sahifa, which comprises 138 hadiths and is believed to have been written around the mid-1st/7th Islamic century. It is significant that Hammam introduces his text with the words Abu Hurairah radhiyallahu anhu told us in the course of what he related from the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, thus giving the source of his information in the manner which became known as Sanad or Isnad, the teacher of chain of teachers through whom an author reaches the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, a practice invariably and systematically followed in Hadith compilation. So this is the first reference which just mentions the Sahifa of Hammam ibn Munabbih. Now I'll quote another scholar, Master Sprite, in his article, and just this to show the reliability of the transmission from Sahifa of Hammam ibn Munabbih. For the text in Hammam and those recorded in Ibn Hanbal, Bukhari and Muslim with the same isnad show almost complete identity, except for a few omissions and interpolations which do not affect the sense of the reports. So this is a reliable word-for-word transmission on the same isnad. On the other hand, the same ahadith as told by different transmitters in three collections studied show a rich variety of wording, again without the change of meaning of the reports. So later records matching early records proves is an argument for preservation, right? I have found practically no sign of carelessness or deceptive practice in the variant text common to the Sahifa of Hammam ibn Munabbih. By the way, we don't have actually a 1st century manuscript of Sahifa of Hammam ibn Munabbih, right? We have two manuscripts from the 9th century, early 9th century. By the way, just because this Sahifa is brought up, right? That clown Gautier John Bull, who I've refuted before in multiple videos, he tried to claim that the Sahifa of Hammam ibn Munabbih was made up by Imam Abdul Razak as-San'ani. There's actually a major problem with this claim. The isnad for the Sahifa of Hammam ibn Munabbih, right? That is actually proven valid by the isnad ka matan analysis, or the basically it's not the isnad ka matan analysis. This is my mistake. Harold Modsky did source criticism on the Musannaf of Abdul Razak, not isnad ka matan analysis. He did source criticism. Using source criticism, we can actually establish the reliability of Sahifa of Hammam ibn Munabbih. Why? Because according to the source criticism, using the source criticism, right, we can show that Imam Abdul Razak As-Sanani is honest, and this is what Motsky will admit, at least with regard to what he analyzed. This will show that I think Imam Abdul Razak got this from Mama Rahmatullah alayh, who was honest, and the other people in the Isnad using the source criticism method, right, which Motsky did. We can actually establish the reliability of Saifa Hamam ibn Munabbih because the people in the Isnad for the this Sahifa, right, can be shown to be honest using source criticism. If they can shown to be honest, and by the way, this is something uh, anyone who reads I think many historians will admit this point if they are honest, because Harold Motsky, who is a major authority in this regard, himself admitted this point, that at least the transmissions that he analyzed, right, are reliable. If that is the case, then the claim of Imam Abdul Razak Sanani fabricating Sahifa Hamam ibn Munabbih does not work. Why? For the very simple reason that a source analysis of his work shows his honesty. Same for his source, Imam Mamar ibn Rashid. And I think there was one person more in the Isnad, but we can establish the reliability as well. So basically, uh, the one contention that can be made against Saifa Hamam ibn Munabbih, that it was supposedly fabricated by Imam Abdul Razak As-Sanani, does not work. And it doesn't work by using the work of a major Orientalist scholar such as Harold Motsky. This is not just me shooting from the hip. This is something that, although Motsky might not directly admit that Saifa Hamam ibn Munabbih is preserved, but the isnads for Saifa Imam ibn Munabbih, right? The source for it, Imam Abdul Razak, Imam Mamar, etc., they are shown to be reliable by using the method Motsky used, and he will admit at least the reliability of Imam Abdul Razak As-Sanani and Imam Mamar. So we have a very early collection that we can prove the reliability of quite strongly. Inshallah, I hope you have enjoyed this video. This was a bit long, but this is a serious topic, and it required multiple references because of this serious nature of this topic. Inshallah, I hope you have seen how desperate and pathetic the Orientalist contentions are, and how strong the arguments for Sunni Hadith preservation actually are, and how the contentions don't work. I mean, I think this is the reason why these clowns are running from debates from Muslims from on Hadith preservation. Think about this. Biblical scholars are able to debate Christians, right, on reliability of biblical sources. Look at Bartham and look at Dale Martin, look at I forgot the name of the other guy, but a lot of biblical scholars are able to debate Christians regarding the reliability of the Bible. Why can't Western Orientalists grow a spine and debate Muslims? Well, simple fact is they have no good arguments, and the lateness of sources is something they whine about a lot. And when scrutinized, this argument fails massively. Inshallah, I hope you have enjoyed this video. Inshallah, I'll keep refuting these clowns till next time. Assalamu alaikum.